Good evening. We will now call to order the Chesterfield Township Planning Commission meeting on April 4th, 2023. I will call the roll. Mr. Miller is here. Mr. LaBelle? Here. Mr. DeBink, excused. Mr. Leonard? Here. Mr. Renault, excused. Mr. Jaworski?
Here.
Mr. Klanowski? Here. Mr. Carr? He's excused. Mr. Brokart?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is the approval of the agenda. Approval of the minutes of the prior meetings. I will make a motion to approve the minutes of March 21st, 2023.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. LaBelle. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Approval of the agenda. I will make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. Jaworski. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Reviews, our Secretary Rick will do the items we can do in a timely manner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item A is amend Chapter 76 zoning map. It is to initiate the amendments to the Chesterfield Township zoning map, including 17 parcels of land along 26 Mile Road from I-94 to County Line Road. The public hearing was closed on 3/21. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion, if I may.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of this zoning change to MX2. During the creation of our new zoning areas, the master plan, we talked about different areas, the Gratiot corridor, the Jefferson corridor, and this 26 Mile Road corridor. It does make sense. This is in line with our master plan, as our master plan has implemented. So I'd like to make a motion to approve. And what this is going to do, it's going to promote the health and safety and welfare of the general community. It is an implementation of our ultimate master plan. It provides walkable streetscapes and to activate facades and sidewalks. It promotes small business. And it's almost like a park setting where you're going to have homes and you're going to have business and you're going to have retail, things of that nature. With that, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval.
Support. We have a motion by Mr. LaBelle, supported by Mr. Miller. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I did abstain from that vote because
Okay.
of conflict of interest, just one.
Right, okay. Comments from the floor is permitted by the commission on non-agenda items. Anybody on the board want to have anything to say? What? Yeah, we do. Non-agenda related communications, receive and file all regarding agenda items, committee reports, ordinance amendments, board liaison reports, reviews, discussions from the member of the commission, consultants, and township employees. Cannabis ordinance draft. Ms. Bain.
Good evening. It's nice to see everybody. Hopefully we're on our last go around with this ordinance. We can start doing some other things with our time. We have the third, I believe, final draft of the marijuana establishments zoning regulations for you. Just to note a couple of changes from our last conversation. We talked about the size of establishments and the parking and separation distances, so we clarified that in this draft. We had an outstanding question about whether there should be a 500-foot separation between the establishments, given that now we're in, that's just the establishments themselves, not the distance between them and our other sensitive uses, which we've already said is 1,000 feet. So that would be an outstanding question for us to discuss tonight. We do want to highlight that there was a concern about retail customers mixing with shipping and receiving areas. Michigan law does require retail areas to be separated from stock rooms and storage areas, so where the products are stored, by a counter or other barrier. And then we don't know that there needs to be additional regulations at this point between, for example, an armored car delivery person going back and forth, because we don't really do that for other uses. And I guess we can talk about whether we think that might be appropriate or not. Two things to clarify in our draft. So you've got a draft with some red line language. I did take out anything from before, so that anything read now is newer language. Just a couple of things to clarify, like we said, with the separation distance measurements, just to clarify what that is. We also added a standard on water usage. So you may have noted that on page 9 and 10 of the draft, that all of what was formerly section 9, specific requirements for marijuana manufacturing establishments, we deleted all that based on some discussion with staff and with their attorney about those standards being additional standards that we don't have for other industrial uses. However, we were concerned about water usage, and then we determined that that really does apply to all industrial uses as well. So in the draft, you'll see now back on page 6 of the draft, in red, a new standard specifically relating to managing water usage on industrial properties. So that'll apply to these establishments as well as any other uses that we permit in the township in those industrial districts. We may need a little bit of additional refinement in there based on some additional feedback, but the intent, that may be just a couple of words there. The other question, and I know we've talked about, whether there may be other permits that might be needed from various other entities. I think one additional thing to clarify would be on page 8. That would be item 5I, a new I letter. So this would be under, oops, I went to page too far for myself. Zoning review application requirements. We have 8 of those so far, A through H. Adding I, that would be evidence of approval of other permits or licenses that may be required by Chesterfield Township, Macomb County, or the state of Michigan. To just make sure that we've covered. We don't know what all of the additional licenses or permits that may be needed, but we do require that they're provided for us. I don't think there was anything else, but one question that we were thinking about for our separation distances and our inclusion of separation from residentially zoned properties. I wanted to clarify with the Planning Commission if we are talking about single family and multifamily, which is I think what we would interpret that to be, but whether we're also including, or if we want to specifically state it in the ordinance that we don't include mixed-use districts like the one we're just talking about. So that would be another item to talk about tonight. But the hope is that we can work through those remaining items and you feel comfortable enough to set the public hearing for May 2nd. At which time you can still make additional changes as may be needed based on some of the feedback, and then you will make a recommendation to the Township Board, who will take final action.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Mr. Siebert?
I just wanted to raise one other issue that I spoke with Gary DeMaster, your building official, on this afternoon. As I was, we've met and we've reviewed this several times since the Planning Commission met last. There's a provision under Section 4, Sub 4B, that talks about the acquisition of a certificate of occupancy once you get a license from Chesterfield. And there's a 6-month provision in there which indicates that you have to get once you get a license from the clerk's office, you have to get a C of O from us within 6 months or your license gets yanked. And we didn't distinguish between an existing building and new construction. And when I spoke with Gary this afternoon, obviously if it's new construction, you're not going to get a C of O in 6 months if it's new construction. And what he proposed, and what I think is reasonable, subject to your review, is if it's an existing building that you're going into, from the date you get your license from the clerk's office, you got 6 months to get a C of O. That's reasonable. If you're going to construct a new building, that you have to pull a building permit within 6 months after you get your license, and that building permit has to remain active, which means you have to continue doing work on the building. I mean, if you had a manufacturing facility go up here, it may take a year, 18 months, 2 years to build it. And certainly you're not going to penalize an applicant who's going to build a brand-new spanking facility if they don't get a C of O in 6 months, because that's not going to happen. So what you'd be doing is discouraging, if not completely prohibiting, any new construction. So that was the only comment we had this afternoon.
Thank you. And individual comments from commissioners? Mr. Jaworski,
Not this evening. No, thank you.
Mr. Leonard? Mr. LaBelle?
Just one more thing that I had brought up, Jill, previously is, for the retail, we, currently, as you have written, it has one parking space for 150 square foot of building. And I realize that in most cases, that would probably be fine. But there is a retail facility who I believe sells things a little bit less than others do, and you still can't find a place to park in his parking lot. So in my heart, I feel that we need to make that one parking space for 100 square feet for the retail atmosphere. The second thing is I had an opportunity before the meeting to talk about, something else that we had talked about was the inspections, because the Macomb County Health Department does not inspect the food, if you're producing food, gummies, brownies, things of that nature. But there is an entity in the state, it's called MDART, that does inspect, and they inspect annually, correct? Yeah. They do inspect annually. Twice annually?
That's what he said.
Twice annually they inspect. So I do feel better about that.
Anything else?
And the last thing I'd like to bring up is, we had an opportunity to talk as well, and I truly believe that the 1,000-foot buffer is the answer. But after reviewing the maps, if we do include an M1 and an M2, it opens up 1,268 acres of possibility for these facilities. And in my opinion, I think that is what we should do. And also, I think what it's going to do is, once this ordinance is adopted, it's going to curb how many people are going to be coming in front of us to change the zoning from M2 to M1. That's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brokart?
I just wanted to add one thing. If we were to go M1 500-foot boundary or separation, the acreage is about 800 versus the 1,200 with the M1, M2. So much less restrictive. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Any other opinions? Any comments from the general public? 3 minutes.
Good evening, Bob Kirk, 19500 Hall Road, Clinton Township. I like all your changes you discussed today. The one I want to talk about is the 500-foot buffer between retail facilities. We've been on both sides of this cannabis, both from municipalities and from operators. The 500 feet, to me, is going to open up litigation. You're going to have people sleeping out front to get the application in first. This would be in the event maybe you had 2 retail centers right next to each other. Whoever gets it first, the other one's shut out. That's been fodder for litigation in Mount Clemens. With regard to the 1 to 150 or 1 to 100, I agree. I know, like in Utica, normally retail's fine, but this is an industry, it seems, it gets kind of busy on, it looks like Thursdays and Fridays. So any, additional parking relief would probably be good. And I agree with Mr. Siebert on the new construction to make a differentiation on that. That's it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Gary Gennernock, 52624 Laurel Oak Lane in Chesterfield. Mr. LaBelle had a comment, and I was taking a note. I think he indicated there's 1,268 acres of M1 that would be available for marijuana facilities?
M1 and M2 if we had both.
And so my related question is, do you have a drawing or a map that reflects that calculation?
Yes.
And can we get that?
All the maps that we've created that have been part of the packets have been available. Which one was it that you were looking for?
Well, Mr. LaBelle said that there was 1,268 acres of M1 and M2 that could be available for cannabis operations.
I believe
And
that
I
was-
take it that means that they'd be 1,000, because part of your draft said it could not abut residential zone districts.
Correct.
And a lot of industrial parks in Chesterfield or industrial buildings are adjacent to residentially zoned property, so then they would all be precluded. So that's why I wanted to know if you have that drawing.
That, I believe, was available in the March packet.
Okay. And some of my clients, they would just suggest that the measurement be 500 feet from residential, if that's a preclusion. And then I reviewed what I thought was your most recent draft, so I have a synopsis of my review of that I'd like to hand out to you. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Question, I think you indicated that it would probably be set for a public hearing on May 2nd, and I would respectfully request that you put it to the second meeting in May. I'm going to be out of state. It's my wife's birthday on May 3rd, and we're going to Colorado to visit my daughter, so obviously you have the discretion to honor the request or not, and my clients would prefer that I be here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to speak?
Ken Kuzminski, 37420 26 Mile Road. I live on the newly zoned MX2 area, and how does that pertain to any marijuana dispensaries or anything to do with marijuana? Is that going to be allowed in that area?
Joe?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
In the newly zoned area, the MX2 area, is what is going to be allowed in that area as far as dispensaries or anything to do with marijuana?
Just the M1 and the M2, not the MX.
So that's going to disadvantage me by selling my property to anybody that has anything to do with marijuana, correct?
I guess I'm not really clear on your question.
Can people buy the property that I live on to do marijuana, to sell marijuana, or to?
If your property is zoned M1 or M2 and it's outside the buffer areas,
So MX2, it will not be allowed in that area.
currently that's not the way the ordinance is written. It's just M1 and M2.
And, okay, so that the 17 people in that area will not, there won't be anything to do with marijuana in that 17?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Mark Abraham. My address is 5291 Parker Road, Fort Gratiot. As many of the board members have seen, first thing I'd like to do is to say bravo to the whole group. You guys have worked really hard. You've done umpteen amount of research. Lots of these projects that I've been involved in, and a lot of these communities don't work nearly as hard as this board has, so I commend you for that. Thank you for that. I'm here to speak to the setbacks and to make sure that everybody, and I'm sure you do understand that, the 1,000-foot number doesn't have to be across the board. It can be 1,000 for church and school, and that's what almost every community. In fact, I can't think of one that didn't pick 1,000, and then a smaller number for residential, because it is so hard to hit 1,000 in a community like ours, where, you know, there's so much residential and it's popping up all over the place. So I would like to respectfully ask that we look at that number and say that there's a path to have a different setback for residential, and not be creating way more opportunities. Of all the people that come to these meetings, the different operators like myself, none of the sites that we've looked at fit within that 1,000-foot buffer. That's how hard it is. It's really, really hard. And I know that we can look at numbers like acreage. I know that very smart people at Giffords have looked at that. But what matters to the operators is what of those properties are for sale. None of them. I mean, the folks that we have, that, you know, the most prestigious realtors that work with us to try to find these sites, there's just nothing available. So I'm only asking, you know, for that consideration, because if there was 15 of them available, there'd be no reason to argue that number at all. But I'd just like to ask for reconsideration on that number, only because of the fact that it is, right now as it sits, it's impossible. There's just nothing that fits that 1,000 times 3. 1,000 for the first two, and then maybe a slightly smaller number. You only have to make the residential setback slightly smaller, and it adds a lot of opportunities. So that's all I'm asking. Again, I respect everybody here for the hard work you've done, but I'm just saying, in a reasonable sense, you know, there has to be somewhere where there's an opportunity now. And right now, there's just not. So thank you for your consideration. I appreciate y'all very much.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman has asked, I'm going to make a motion to set up the public hearing for May 2nd. Oh, I'm sorry. No?
Before we make the motion, can we just confirm on the question about residentially zoned property? I just want to clarify. I think that it would be commonly, and probably commonly assumed, because in most or earlier zoning ordinances, residentially zoned property meant they were very different. They were exclusively for residential, right? But now we've got two mixed-use districts that also allow residential uses, and are we intending to include those as well, or would those be excluded because they're mixed?
Rich?
My thought is they'd be excluded because they're mixed. That would be my thought.
Would we want
So
to?
residential property would be a homeowner or like an apartment building.
Do we want to just state the districts in which this? I think so.
It would make sense, because, I mean, this is an area that,
We want to be clear.
if this is recommended by the commission to the board and the board approves it, this is an issue that is ripe for a challenge, not because anybody's is looking to pick a fight. It's just that it's not clear. It says residentially zoned property. You're probably for sure going to include, you know, all your R1, R2, R3, whatever it is, single-family residential. You're for sure going to include residential multiple. Those are easy ones, but when you've got a mixed-use development where you have some commercial and residential, somebody's going to walk in that's got a piece of property 900 feet away and say, I want to put in a marijuana establishment, and then there's a red flag that's going to get raised. Well, there's some residential mixed in within that 1,000 feet along with the commercial. So let's avoid the fight now and clarify it. If you only want residential in the sense of single-family and multiple, then call it out. And if you're not going to include mixed use, then exclude it. I mean, Jill and Stephanie can simply put in the district, you know, M1 or R1, R2, whatever it is, RM1, RM2, whatever the numbers are. Put those in, and so it's clear that that's the one you're talking about. And save a fight you don't need to pick. If that's what you want to do, but I think
Right.
this is the time to talk about it.
My thought is it's already a mixed district with businesses and homes, or residential and business. Why change that? So that's why I would exclude.
I think we could all go along with that, right?
But not only the MX1, but the MX2
Yeah.
as well. MX2 and MX1, you know, of all the mixed-use areas.
Yeah, they're mixed use.
Yes,
So call out the R1, R2,
Right.
R3.
The Jefferson corridor is MX1, I believe.
Okay.
Right.
There isn't any M1 or M2 there anyway, but that'd be a good point.
Okay.
And well, I guess one more question is one of Mr. Kirk's statement about the 500-foot buffer between businesses. I'd like to clarify that I would personally like to just see the, you know, the 1,000 feet for residential, churches, daycares, you know, all of that. The 500-foot buffer between the businesses, I personally don't have a problem with that. And I don't know how you've written it.
so is there consensus that we don't need the 500-foot distance between establishments?
Correct.
That's what I thought I understood, okay.
My opinion.
You don't need them? We don't need them?
Okay, and then my last question for you is on parking. So as I'm going through this again and looking at the parking requirement, I've just noticed that the standard that we have in there, 1 space for each 150 square feet of floor area, is likely an older standard from when this, we originally made this draft. So it's actually 1 space for 200 square feet of floor area according to our current draft. So we'd like to go through our parking standards and make sure that those are accurate for the retail uses. Retail itself does have differing standards. So if we feel like 150, 1 to 150 is sufficient, then we can just write that for marijuana establishments. If we want to do it with the retail, we could have it at 1 to 200. And if we want it retail for convenience stores, I believe that's 1 for 185. So we've got some different, like I say, we have some different standards. So like more discussion on that, what your thoughts were on the parking itself. Because I know there's at least one of you that wants 1 to 100, which would be, let's see, what would that be similar to if I look real quick? That would be more similar to like a restaurant type standard. We require 1 for each 100 square feet of floor area for restaurants, not fast food or carry out. Those have a higher standard.
Well, if you had a 3,000 square foot retail building, and I don't know how much, you know, how big the buildings are gonna be, that's 20 parking spaces. Is that enough? I don't think that's enough for employees. And
The one we visited had 20 employees and they probably only had 15 spaces. It was way not enough parking. So there has to be more parking involved. They had people parking down the side streets. They had employees parking down the side streets, and we don't want that. We want them to park in their own parking lot.
And I think it's important to note that usually these, the higher traffic is toward the weekend or toward the end of the week. So they get a flood of patrons coming in. And that's why you need the higher standards. Also, for the consumption, we would want the higher standards, the consumption lounges, because if the, you know, that's, you know, kind of a bar setting, if you will, so. A restaurant setting, yeah.
What if we, instead of messing around with the actual number, and maybe, you know, picking a different one, what if we include a statement for the retailers, all needed parking, including any queuing for pickup services, shall be provided and contained on site? Does that work for you, that it's however many parking spaces you think you need, you have to provide them all on site? If you have pickup service, you can't have people queuing out into the street. People can't park on the street. You have to provide all your parking on the.
But how do you calculate that when they come in for site plan approval?
Well, you base it on the standard for retail.
Yeah, I
The
would,
suggestion.
I don't know if I'd go for that.
So the key is,
Okay.
this has to be fairly ministerial. So when they come to you and they submit a site plan, you got to treat retailer A the same as you do retailer B, the same as retailer C. There can't be really any discretion. If they all have a 3,000 square foot size building, they all got to have the same parking. So I
Well,
just,
yeah, and I guess my suggestion is not that you're doing anything at the time of site plan review. It's more of an enforcement issue.
Right.
after that, that there's a problem. You have cars queuing out into the street. You've got people parked on the street, parked on wherever.
But then how
That's
does
a
the,
violation of the plan.
how does the retailer control that? I mean, you know,
They need to
you
make sure
can't
they're
control.
providing enough parking.
There's a store in New Baltimore right now, and they're constantly writing tickets because they're parked all over the street. They can't fit them all into their parking space, so it seems like it'd be hard to control, not hard to enforce. You can write tickets all day long, but for the retailer, I'm not sure if they'd be able to really control that. You can't tell people you can't come to our business at a certain time. I don't
Well,
know.
then does it seem fair to say that the retailer should know how much parking they need and choose a site accordingly that has sufficient space?
If it's in writing, you know, how many parking spaces, you know, per, 100, one per 100 square feet, it's cut and dry.
Okay.
But, you know, that's, no, I agree as well. I mean, what you're creating here is an enforcement issue that could create a whole other gamut. I mean, how good is it enforced? How well is it enforced? And it's gonna create chaos or create a lot of strain on the existing infrastructure without parking on site. But you had mentioned we have retail and convenience store requirements, and those are exactly, do you have those
That one's 1 to 185.
for retail?
For retail store, convenience store, yes.
I mean, that's
Could you say that
fitting,
again, Joe?
correct?
What is the number?
1 space per 185 square feet of floor area. And then retail stores, freestanding discount is 1 for each 240 square feet, and retail stores, 1 space for each 200 square feet. So we'd like to work on that in a later date, but to just make sure we're clear on all of that. But so the most restrictive would be the retail store, convenience store at 1 space per 185. That is a current standard. But if you want to create a new standard, that's 1 for each 100 square feet, then we will just add that in.
Yeah, that's what it was before. What, we're kind of thinking that, that's what's in the ordinance right now. We're just debating what the, you know, we want.
And what was it before, 20? No, 100. Oh, it'd be 30, so we're losing 6 by doing it. I think it's real. I think this is just different than a convenience store. I mean, I've never had to park on the street trying to get a 12-pack. Sure. So I don't know. Well, I was gonna say, you brought that recommendation today, right? Because we've been working off of 1 to 150 up until today.
We had
Okay.
some discussions in the past about 100 as well.
Okay.
And I think to be on the safe side, because of the concentration of the traffic, you know, based on, New Baltimore had a situation like that where they filled up the parking lots quite a bit, so.
But let me bring this up, though. I mean, let's be brutally honest. We are in the tail end of this wave, right? There's facilities all over Michigan. I mean, is the demand going to somehow tail off? If we make a requirement to create all these parking spots, we're going to end up like Lakeside Mall. You know, you get too much parking for a retail.
I think there might be some, that's valid, but I think there's a lot of people that have never indulged. They've never tried it. You know, it's still transitioning, I think, from being illegal to a legal product. And so even though there may be more facilities, there also may be more people that are gonna try it for the first time, or, you know, or try it for medical reasons. And so it's a different kind of business. I mean, I've never gone to buy a 12-pack of beer and had to park in the street. So most of the businesses that everybody's used to going to, these formulas seem to work. This is kind of, you know, a little different, and I don't think we want to have a problem with traffic enforcement and writing tickets, and police got enough to take care of it. I don't know if we're creating a problem by not having enough, and the amount of employees that all these stores have, you know. You go to a party store, you got 2 employees. You know, these places, there's numerous employees, so.
I agree with Rick with 100. So, does anybody disagree on 100?
Just for the retail?
Yeah.
No, I agree.
Okay?
Good.
Jill?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Rick, go ahead and finish that.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to set up a public hearing for May 2nd, 2023. Get a support?
Support. I'll just make sure the date.
Make sure you got the date right?
May 2nd.
May 2nd?
Right, Jill, May 2nd?
I support.
We got a motion by Mr. LaBelle, supported by Mr. Brocart. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Comments from individual commissioners? Mr. Jaworski?
None for me this evening, thank you.
Mr. Klanowski?
No, nothing.
Mr. Leonard?
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. LaBelle?
Looking for volunteers for pre-planning. Mr. Leonard and Mr. Burkhardt.
Mr. Brocart, do you have any comments?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
So I will make a motion to adjourn at 7:42.
Support.
We have a motion by Mr. Miller, supported by Mr. LaBelle. All in favor?
Aye.